Good evening, gaming enthusiasts. This is the Game Sage here, welcoming you to my very first Game Maker Studio tutorial. And this is going to be basic as basic can be. This entire tutorial is going to be focused on the Game Maker Studio environment. And all I'm going to do is pretty much just teach you guys, or just briefly explain what all these tabs do, as well as just, if we're lucky, if we have time, I'm going to try and create a very simplistic game and teach you guys just how to get something to appear on the screen. So, when you create a new project, the first thing you're going to notice is the Game Maker News tab. This I like a lot because you always want to be up to date on any updates or anything new to Game Maker. And it's kind of nice that you don't have to go to the website, where this will always just update you and let you know if there's a new version that's come out or just anything new in general. So this is kind of cool. Once you create a new project, you can read this and then just close it out. Don't need it. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. Much like any other Windows Mac program, you're going to have your basic file menu where you can create a new project, open project, save all, etc. All basic stuff. Anybody should know what these things do pretty much, regardless of what program you're using. So, the actual important things, don't worry about any of this other tabs up here, other than the help menu, which can be useful. But the help menu you can just access from this question mark down here, this button. So don't even worry about any of this top stuff. So we drop down one, and again you have create a new game, open, or save. For lazy people who don't feel like going on their file and create a new project that way. So the lazy people buttons are right here. And then the fourth button, you have create an executable for target. And what this does is, once you've created your game, or just put some kind of a semblance of a game together, and you just want to show a friend, or you just want to transfer it to another computer, whatever you might want to do, you can create an executable, and you'll all compress everything into one single file, and then you can show your friends or relatives or whatever your cool game. So very simplistic. And then you have run the game, which once you've created a project, or you're going to be clicking this button a lot, it will automatically compile all your game, make sure there's no errors, and then it will run your project, or run your game. Pretty simple. Next button over is run game in debug mode. Now, to be completely honest, I do not use this at all, and it should be more useful, because what this does is, let's say you've coded a lot of stuff, or you put together a very simplistic game and you keep running into some kind of a weird error that you cannot figure out. The purpose of debuggers is it will go line by line, usually, of your code, and it will tell you what's wrong with your game. Or you go through it and then you'll end up finding bugs or errors in your code easier using this. But the Game Maker Studio one is just awful. I don't use it. I've tried using it. It's just one of the... I've used so much programming languages like Java and C++, and their debuggers are so much better. It makes this one look like a joke, honestly. So don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. You're not gonna need this, so don't worry about it. Okay. Then you have a bunch of useless buttons. I wouldn't worry about these things right now. Nothing too useful. And then you can create a sprite. So here's something that's kind of funny. You can create a sprite, create a sound, create a background, blah, 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 all the way down to the plus symbol, which is create an extension. So let's just click, just for the heck of it, if you click create a sprite, let's close that window out for now, you'll notice that it automatically created a sprite underneath the sprite folder. So let me just delete that because I don't want it. So basically, all these buttons up here is just a lazy version of doing this, clicking the folder sprites, right-clicking, and hitting create sprite. So once again, just shortcut keys to doing everything over here, or to creating everything here. So don't worry about any of these buttons either. The only real useful button out of everything here is the question mark. I use this a lot. If you click the question mark, it's going to bring up the Game Maker Studio manual. If you go to search, you can type anything you want, and I tell you, this is probably one of the best help files I think I've ever dealt with. So let's just, let me think of an example here. Let's say you want to find out how to add music to your game. Add music. List topics. Sounds and music. So if you click sounds and music, it has all this nice information here, and just really helpful guide on how to add music into your game. If you go to sound, other things, functions, just all kinds of helpful information. Even for advanced users, I definitely would recommend using this help file when you're lost or you just want to know how to do something. So this is probably the only really useful thing on here, other than maybe creating an executable and running the game. Now, onto the actual good stuff. How do we make a game? Well, we make it by creating or using all these wonderful folders and creating sprites or sounds or etc. So let's start with the first item here, sprites. So if I go ahead and right-click the sprites folder and click on create sprite, we're going to get this new window that appears that allows us to create a sprite. Now, before I do anything, what exactly is a sprite? And the best way I can explain this is basically 90 to 95% of everything visual you see in your game is a sprite. So what does this mean? This means your player character is a sprite, the enemies in your game are sprites, bosses in your games are sprites, projectiles like bullets, swords, weapons are sprites, platform spikes, obstacles, everything you see is a sprite. Even backgrounds are considered sprites, like clouds, mountains, and just larger images that usually you don't interact with. Things in the backgrounds, which is why they call backgrounds, are sprites. So what you're probably asking right away is, well, if backgrounds are sprites, Dario, then why is there a folder called backgrounds? Well, best way for me to explain this is a background technically is a type of sprite. It's just they decided to put it as a separate folder just to kind of clean things up so that you don't have clouds and mountains and just all kinds of crap under your sprites folder. So really, a background is a type of sprite. They just decide to separate them to separate folders just to make things a little easier on the eyes. So really, a background is a sprite. So yeah, again, 90 to 95% of everything visual you see is a sprite. The only exception, I think, would be probably particle effects. And I'll get into that in a later tutorial, so don't worry about that right now. But particle effects is not really a sprite, it's something else. But, yeah, so 90 to 95% of everything visual you see is a sprite. So let's quickly create a sprite here. I'm just going to call it SPR player. Don't worry about naming conventions or why I'm calling him SPR player or why I'm using the abbreviation SPR at this point. Just know that I'm basically creating a sprite to represent our player image, our main character image in the game. So SPR player, I'm going to click load sprite, and I have a link standing image that I already have in my folder here. I'm going to click on remove background, which is a nice feature in Game Maker. They allow you to move all the whole black border or any color border you might have surrounding your sprite. So removing it, and then just hit open, and there you have it. Now, one thing I do want to show you real quick is if I click edit sprite, and then I double click image 0, you'll notice there's like a built-in image editor into Game Maker Studio, which is kind of cool. It's better than Paint, not as good as Photoshop or PaintShop Pro, but it does the job. So you can always create your character here, modify a character that you've loaded, transform like flip, mirror, flip, or just other things you might want to do to your character or draw. Pretty useful. I won't be using it much during my tutorial series just because I can't draw to save my life. So all the images I'm going to be using are stuff that I already have saved in my folders. And yeah, that's pretty much it. What I will do though, for those of you that want to follow along, is all the sprites I show from tutorial to tutorial, I will link in the description of my YouTube video so you guys can go ahead and download it. And just follow along that way. So if you want this character here, the link will be in the description for you guys to go ahead and grab him. So once you have him imported, I'm just going to hit the check mark. And now, the only other thing I'm going to do, and you don't need to worry about this right now, is I'm going to center the origin on the character. Don't worry about what that does right now. Just know that I'm setting the center of the sprite to the center. I know it's a little confusing right now. Don't worry about it. Then hit OK. And we have our first sprite. So that's sprites. Sounds pretty self-explanatory. All the music and sound effects in your game will go under the sounds folder. Backgrounds I've explained. It's just another type of sprite. So if you have cloud images or mountains or anything you might want to use as like a background image or a foreground image, probably want to put it under the backgrounds folder instead of the sprites just to make things a little easier for you. Paths, we're not going to use a whole lot of it until maybe like a future, way down the road in a future tutorial. And really no other game development tool or programming language I could think of has a built-in paths folder. Paths are basically, let's say you have, let me quickly just create one just to briefly show you. Let's say you have a boss in your game right here, and you wanted him to move in some crazy, absolutely ridiculous like pattern in your game. You can create a path that will set points and automatically move them. Not automatically, you have to do a little work, but create points that makes it a little easier for him to move in a crazy path without you know, programming point to point. So that's paths. It just sets routes and movements in your game. Tries to make it easier. I've never really used paths, but yeah, that's pretty much what it does. Let me go ahead and delete it because we don't want any paths in this right now. Okay. Scripts, also a little advanced for your most beginners. If you're a programmer, if you've programmed before using C++ or Java, you probably know what a script is. It's just another way of saying a function. And best way I can explain it briefly is a script basically helps you reduce code in your project. So if you have like something that is reused a lot in your game, like let's say you have a text box with dialogue box, and you wanted to create a script to handle. Okay, let's say I wanted to have black text appear in the text box now, or in the message box, or red text, blue text, bold, italic, shadow, whatever, all kinds of stuff. Like, you can create one script that handles all of that instead of having a million objects, which is something else I'll get into, instead, that does it. So to reduce clutter, you'll create a script, or you have scripts in your game to make things a little more simplistic. I'll get into that later. Don't really worry about it for now. Just know that it helps clean up code a lot, or helps clean up your game a lot. Shaders, another advanced thing, and to be honest, shaders did not exist in earlier versions of GameMaker Studio. It's actually something relatively new to GameMaker Studio. And shaders are basically code. So you put code in here, into the shaders folder, that manipulates, or it taps into your graphics card that you have on your computer to manipulate your sprites. So you've seen shaders before in other programs like PaintShop Pro or maybe Sony Vegas. Glow effects, if you wanted your sprite to glow, or shadow effects, or lighting, sometimes lighting effects, or water effects is a big one. Shaders are it's a way of making your game look prettier, or just adding really nice looking graphical effects to your game. I've never used shaders before. I've messed around with it in other programs, but not in Game Maker Studio. But shaders is advanced graphic options. Maybe down the road we'll be getting into tutorials that go into these, but for now, don't worry about it. It's very complicated. Yeah, that's shaders. Fonts, pretty self-explanatory. You can go ahead and create your own font. You can choose Arial. Instead of you creating fonts through coding, you can create your own here, and then just reference it, make things easier. So you can create your own fonts, your own size, there, 15, whatever. That's fonts. Pretty easy. Useful, definitely. So that's fonts. Timelines. I've never really used it in Game Maker Studio, but I know what it is. Timelines are basically, if you have something you want to go run in a certain sequence, like let's say you had an enemy and you wanted an enemy in your game to run 50 steps, then jump straight up, then fall, then die, and you just wanted a sequence of events to happen in your game, like a cutscene almost, it would be pretty useful to use timelines to do it. A lot of people just code it in themselves, which is fine, and it's works fine that way. But timelines is supposed to be a way of simplifying cutscenes in your game. So something I'll look into. I'll probably have a future tutorial on it, but for now, don't worry about it. Much like fonts, much like shaders and scripts and paths, it's just something we're not going to be using for a while. Really, the only things we're going to be using in most of these tutorials to start with is sprites, backgrounds, objects, and rooms. So objects is the most important folder in your project, and objects are everything and anything and everything in your game, really. Like, you'll have your sprite player, so this is your sprite image. You know, if you look at them, this is your image in your game of your character. But okay, well, how do you control them? How do you do certain things with them? That's what an object is. So I'm going to go ahead and just quickly, I'm not going to get into objects much in this tutorial, but I'm just going to go ahead and quickly create an object. And I'm just going to call them OBJ player. Okay, which stands for object player. Again, don't worry about the naming conventions, because that's something I'll get into next tutorial, but just calling them object player. And then here where it says sprite, okay, you have your object. So an object is basically your controller, or what you're going to, your event controller. So, okay, you have your sprite, but what are you going to do with it? Well, you got to create an object to control it. So I'm going to go ahead and choose, if you click on sprites here, it's going to allow you to attach this object to a sprite, or attach a sprite to this object. So I'm going to go ahead and click on SPR player, sprite player. And now if I hit OK, you'll notice that the sprite automatically attaches to this object. And it's here so you can see it. So let me go to edit again because I want to show you one more thing. There's a lot of windows here. A lot. This is all so much crap here. A lot of this you don't need to worry about, because I'm going to be going to this in the next tutorial. And really, all these buttons you see on the right are drag and drop buttons, which is one way of working with Game Maker Studio. And I will be doing a little drag and drop the next tutorial to kind of show you how to move around using drag and drop. But most of what we do is going to be through code, and we'll get into that next tutorial. But anyways, to keep this tutorial as simplistic as possible, we created an object player, which is going to control our sprite. And this is how we're going to move around and whatnot. Visible. I don't know why you would want to make your character invisible, but you can do that. Solid. Something else. Don't worry about any of this stuff right now. I'm not going to overwhelm you. Events, actions, don't worry about any of it. So all I'm doing right now is I created an object player, which is referencing our sprite player, and this is going to be what we're going to put all the code, and everything we do in here is going to be in relation to our character, our main character. Okay? So that's objects. Rooms. I'll be back to that in a second because I just want to cover these last couple. Included files. It's if you want to, everything you import into your game, like sounds, backgrounds, images, are all stuff in your game. Well, it's possible to have external files outside of your game and then use included files like you would put code, I think it's code. If I could create included files. No, yeah. So if I click create included file, it's going to ask me to open something. So this is kind of like it references things outside. I don't really use this. I'm sure people will. Extensions is if you're too lazy to create your own code. You can go online and find other game maker code and import it and use that. Then there's macros. Don't worry about that right now. Game information and global game settings. These two you can. If I go to global game, oops, what the hell are they? Global game settings. You can set project info, Windows. You have graphics tab. You can change how certain things run in your project. Don't worry about that right now either. Don't worry about any of this stuff. So the only other thing left to cover is rooms. So we've now covered sprites. We've covered objects slightly. Rooms. What is a room? If we go ahead and click create room, it's going to bring up this crazy looking window. I'm going to go ahead and expand it just so you can see it clearer. And I'm going to go to settings, the settings tab here. Here we're just going to name it room RM for room test. Again, don't worry about the naming conventions. And I'm going to set my width to 1280 by 720. And this is just going to be the size of my room as well as the size of my window when I run the game. Speed is something I'm going to cover again in the next tutorial. It's just frames per second kind of. Don't worry about that right now. Leave it at 30. Backgrounds is when you do have backgrounds like clouds or mountains, you can go ahead and use these 7 different backgrounds to layer them. You can actually have more than 7 layers, but this is what it gives you here. So you can layer your stuff using backgrounds. And you can also have a horizontal speed, vertical speed to create like a panorama effect. Really neat little stuff built into GameMaker. Don't worry about that right now. So we've been there, views, don't worry about that. Tiles, don't worry. So the only other thing I want to do here is go back to objects. So you have your whole room, and basically what a room is it's kind of like your container. All your objects in your game, all your objects and everything you put into your game is going to have a room. So if I put my player character, okay, well, it's kind of like your level almost. Okay, well, I got my player character into the game. Let's scale to, just make him a little bigger so you guys can see him. So I added him into the game. It's kind of like our level. And if you don't have a level or a room, you have no game. You can't do anything because, you're going to have to put objects to interact with, things like that. So this, again, it's just basically a canvas for your level. That's what a room is. So all I did is I just left-clicked. You can actually put multiple player characters into your room, which is kind of funny. Let me just delete them because I don't want it. So right now I'm just going to have one character. One thing I did forget to do is, let me go back to backgrounds. Just going to make the background image black. Do black or blue. Let's do... Yeah, I don't like that. Let's do black. I don't like black either. Let's do... what color should I do? Blue. That's going to hurt everyone's eyes. I can't decide what color I want. Alright, we'll just go with whatever color this is. This form of green. So we'll go with that. And then once you have all that done, all we did was add a character. I changed the... If I go back to objects... I changed the scale just to make them twice as big to be a little easier to see for now. Alpha, you can control how transparent he is and things like that. So that's it. We're going to click check mark. And now we have a player sprite, an object player, and the room. And this should be enough to run our game now that we have room. So if we go ahead and hit run the game, it's going to compile. And here you see our 1280 by 720 window, and there you go. So we have our character. We can't do anything. If we press left or right, nothing, or up or down or space, nothing happens, because all we really did is we created a character or a sprite player, which is Link, and created an object, so something to reference the sprite. So our object is a reference to it and where we're going to be doing all of our coding for the player. And we created a room to put this guy in. So I hope this made sense. I know this first tutorial has gone on quite long, and it's a lot to take in because I went over everything in one tutorial. But basically, all you really need to know, the important stuff, is the sprites, the objects, and the rooms, which we'll be getting into more depth in our upcoming tutorials. So that is all the time I have for today. This has been the Game Sage here, and I hope you guys have learned something from this, and I will see you guys for our next tutorial where we will cover movement. And what we're going to do in our next tutorial is basically we're going to make this character, in the object player, we're going to make it where if we press the left key, it's going to move left. If you press right, it's going to move right, and up and down. So 4 directions. No animation yet, but that's all we're going to do. I'm going to show you how to make them walk in 4 directions using drag and drop, and then also coding. So that is what we'll cover in our next tutorial. I hope this tutorial made sense. If you have any questions, please comment down below, ask your questions below. The link to the Sprite is in the description. So I hope you guys learned something. I will see you guys next time for tutorial number 2. See y'all later.